With Octopath Traveler 0 just around the corner, and with me having recently tried the demo and loving every single second of it, I figured in celebration to this wonderful modern RPG series that I personally just can't get enough of, why don't we do some character power ranking tier lists? I plan on doing both Octopath 1 and Octopath 2, but today we're doing Octopath Traveler 1. I'm going to be ranking every single character on a tier list. I think it's worth mentioning really quickly before I dive in, at least some of the criteria of what I'm thinking about as I rank these characters. I think it is certainly true that in Octopath Traveler, the strength of the characters really does swing throughout the game, which is to say that there are some characters who I think are very strong early in the game and very weak late in the game, and vice versa. And because Octopath, in my opinion, gets significantly harder later in the game, with the super boss being by far the hardest boss in the game, and some of the other optional bosses being somewhat difficult too, I'm going to skew this list that way, which means if the character is very strong later in the game, that's going to really help their position on this list better. Still, I want this list to be a useful document for any and all players, so I'm not going to totally dismiss the character's early game power, and I think that there are a couple of characters who are capable throughout the entire playthrough, and those characters will do especially well on this list. Alright, so let's jump in. And coming in at 8th place, and the only C tier character in this game, and hell, why don't we just call it the Cyrus tier? Because for me, it's Cyrus. Now, I just finished saying that there are some early game powerhouses that fall off. Cyrus absolutely fits the bill there. If you wanted to argue with me that Cyrus is the strongest character in the game at the very beginning of the game, I wouldn't necessarily fight you on it. His elemental attacks in the beginning of the game are devastating. He can hit entire screens of enemies twice with pretty good elemental coverage for breaking shields. In addition, he gets a passive ability that lowers the random encounter rate. In this game, in my opinion, a godsend. And yeah, he's a very good unit. Now yes, you can get access to secondary jobs in Octopath 1, in my opinion, pretty quickly and pretty early, especially if you know what you're doing, and then you can start to access some of those bells and whistles earlier. But Cyrus's big problem, and I'm not the first person to observe this, is that there exists a hidden class in the game called the Sorcerer, which just completely invalidates the Scholar. It is basically just the Scholar, but better, with better elemental coverage on more powerful 3-hit spells. It's really kind of unfair that Cyrus gets the shaft there, because if you make him a Sorcerer, his other kit is just completely useless and obsolete, and there are other characters in this list who are actually better sorcerers because of equipment options and because of the way their base class might synergize with it. So Cyrus just really does not find a lane in the late game, and the late game is where power level matters the most. So yeah, for my money, Cyrus is the weakest character in this game. Our B tier has 2 characters. Coming in the bottom of B tier in 7th place, for me, it's Olberic. Olberic has problems similar to Cyrus in my opinion. In the very beginning of the game, he's quite powerful. He's tanky, he's durable, he has a sword skill that hits every enemy, and in the early game it's quite respectable damage. In the late game, it kind of falls off, and what you have is a problem like Cyrus, where in my opinion, Olberic's base kit through the warrior is not evergreen. There's just not any abilities here that you're going to really want to find yourself using throughout the game. He has a multi-spear move called 1000 Spears, but the accuracy on it is so spotty that it's like, eh. If you have a single target with a spear weakness, it could be a good shield shredder, but by and large, it doesn't really impress me that much. And what you're left with is a character who is bulky and strong, but I think that there's another character higher up on this list who fills that role as an offensive powerhouse much better, while having better broad utility and coverage in what they are capable of doing. And for those reasons, Olberic suffers and falls down here in 7th place. Good early, but falls off later. At the top of B tier in 6th place is my canonically favorite character, Primrose. Primrose is probably the weakest starter in my opinion. She's squishy, she does not have great overall coverage, and she has no healing ability to sustain herself on top of all of that. But her early game problems aren't really why she's here. She's here because, for starters, there are a lot of buffs that you are capable of replicating through gear and items and other things throughout the game that kind of makes the dancer's utility not quite evergreen. I still think it is evergreen, especially because the dancer, in my opinion, has one of the best divine skills in the game, which makes single target abilities capable of affecting all enemies or all allies. So it's an outstanding divine skill that is always nice to have in the pocket, and I respect Primrose for that. In addition, she's the fastest character in the game by default, and she does pair well with some of the other magical classes like Sorcerer or Starseer. If you do want to have a support slash offensive mage in one, you could do a lot worse than Prim, and because I loved her so much, I did use her a lot personally. But if I'm looking at this list dispassionately, I think that there are other characters who are overall better than her, especially factoring her weak early start, and in the late game there are other characters who I think just bring more to the table. That moves us to 5th place, and in my opinion, our only A-tier character. And this one might be a little bit of a hot take, because I see other people that like this character more than I do, but I'm talking about Honnet. Honnet is just a physical damage powerhouse, and in the early game especially, she's outstanding. The Hunter's Arrow Storm ability is an amazing ability for especially screenfuls of enemies that have arrow weakness. You can really do some devastating damage, especially in the early game with it. Yes, it has accuracy issues, but Hunters have ways of shoring that up. If you get your accuracy good, and you are fighting enemies that are weak to arrow, Arrow Storm could just absolutely obliterate and shred them. It's a skill I absolutely respect. In addition to this, she has Thunderbird. It's not a great skill, but just having a little bit of extra lightning coverage sometimes is what you need for a 1-point shield break. Good to have in the pocket. Nothing I'm going to complain about. But the Hunter's big utility ability that I really respect is Leghold Trap. I think it is probably the single best debuff in the entire game. So it's an evergreen move, and you mix that with some of the later game classes. I personally think Hana is your best candidate for War Master, as she is going to bring top tier natural strength to the table with some of that utility and coverage that we just talked about, and then all of the offensive pressure and devastating damage that the War Master will bring. Yeah, Hanet's an amazing unit. I think she falls low because Leghold Trap is a great thing, and there's another character who can just replicate that for basically no reason, and I think that alone makes her suffer a little bit. And I think overall the other characters are just a bit better. That brings us to the bottom of the S tier, and when I first played Octopath, I actually thought that this character was the strongest character in the game. I've rethought that position, but I still think they're an amazing character, and I am talking about Ophilia. Ophilia has a lot going for her. Throughout the entire game, as a cleric, she's an outstanding healer. Right, she can heal your entire party, and she can do it well. Ophilia, like Primrose, and I forgot to mention this, is capable of bringing NPCs to the battle, and there can be some surprising utility and coverage that you can get out of so doing. It's just another little force multiplier that these characters can bring to battles for additional utility and coverage. She has a full screen revive, useful in a pinch, and she has Reflective Veil, a magic reflect buff that against certain bosses, if played right, can just completely solve the fight on its own. And in addition to all of that, Cleric has, in my opinion, arguably the best divine skill in the entire game, which just allows you to cast your any ability that you do twice. You pair this up with a souped up sorcerer like Therion, and it can just enable devastating damage. Or you put that with Seal Tiege's Seduction, which I talked about earlier with Primrose, and then you use her Reflective Veil so that you double up your entire party with Spell Reflect against a powerful mage boss, and then they can't touch you for several turns in a row. Yeah, there are some really powerful combinations that you can unlock through this divine skill. And on top of all of that, because Ophilia is a cleric with an evergreen base kit, unlike Cyrus, she is a very powerful caster who has a base kit that you can always make use of, whilst pairing her with other powerful caster classes like the Sorcerer or maybe the Starseer to turn her into just the absolute ultimate support unit. Yeah, I think Ophilia is great in the early game as a healer before you have a lot of items with Alfyn, who we'll be talking about in a minute, and she's great throughout the entire game as a healer and magic casting staple. She's an outstanding unit. in 4th place, in my opinion. 3rd place, and I can't believe I had to put him this low, but on reflecting upon everything I did, I'm talking about Alfyn. Now, Alfyn stands, if you think he should be higher, I'm not going to fight you on it, because Alfyn comes this high in this tier list for basically one reason. Concoct, his special ability to mix different herbs and ingredients for different effects, is outstanding and absolutely busted. He can replicate basically every type of elemental attack in the entire game, some of them which are multi-hit for shield breaking. He can replicate all sorts of debuffs on enemies, including leg hold trap, and he's the best support unit in the entire game because he can fully heal the entire party and drastically BP battery them through some of his concoctions. So yeah, Alfyn is just able to completely shut down enemies while enabling your party with tons of BP to lay them up for powerful attacks and buffs. This is bonkers, the amount of economy and utility you can get out of him. I will say that Alfyn really comes online much later in the game. I don't think the Apothecary is a very good base class unless you cheese the game and steal the golden axe or save scumming. I don't generally talk about cheese strategies like that, so forget that. I think the Apothecary is a very weak base class, and his concoct ability isn't great in the early game because you don't just have a bag stuffed full of herbs to concoct with yet. So Alfyn is definitely a grower, not a shower, but in the end game, he is a complete powerhouse. Just a support Swiss Army knife who is absolutely an S tier character. If you want to rank him higher, I wouldn't fight you on it, but factoring his weaker start and some of the stuff that the characters above him here are capable of doing, I landed in 3rd place, but definitely an S tier character. Coming in 2nd place in the S tier for me is Tressa. Like Alfyn, I think Tressa has a bit of a slow start. The Merchant is, in my opinion, arguably the best base class in this entire game because it's evergreen and just gets better with age. But one of her amazing abilities, Hired Help, which does offer all sorts of utility and shield breaking, really comes online later when you have the disposable income to spam it to your needs. That said, even the level 1 version of it for a merely 150 leaves, this thing hits every enemy, does a sword break, and provides a shield defense buff for your allies. Yeah, it's really good. So Hired Help gives her all sorts of offensive and defensive utility, but it costs money. In addition to that, Tressa, and I'm certainly not the first person to observe this at this point, is the best Rune Lord in the entire game because Sidestep, the ability that gives you a 100% chance to dodge any physical attack, can be transfer runed to work on your entire party. Tressa is capable, with the right setup, of giving your entire party 4 or even 8 sidesteps if you do Ophilia's Divine Skill on it. And yeah, this just completely solves and shuts down certain bosses like the War Master who rely on physical attacks. It's bonkers strong. Tressa is also capable through gear options of double boosting wind base attacks, which come built into the Merchant class or can be added through a wind rune as the Rune Lord. And Tressa is the definitive best Rune Lord. So you put all this together, and I forgot to even mention, she also has a built-in BP battery ability through Donate BP. Not always the right play because Tressa has a lot of things she wants to be doing for herself, but it's useful to have. And yeah, you put all this together, the Merchant's an evergreen class, she comes online really strong late in the game, and she is, in my opinion, the 2nd best character in the game. Just like Alfyn, if you wanted to argue she was the best, I wouldn't fight you on it. This is just where I landed. So 1st place on the top of S tier for me, by elimination, is Therion. I expect that this might be a little bit of a hot take, so just hear me out for a second. For starters, I've talked a lot about how all of these higher tier characters come online late game, and Therion does too, but unlike many of these other characters, I actually think Therion is also the best starter in the entire game. The Thief is an amazing starting class. You have Steel HP and Steel SP, so when you venture off into the world solo on your own, you are just a one-man army, totally survivable, self-sustainable powerhouse. Therion happened to be my starter. I played blind, so I didn't know any of this when I played the first time, but he was my starter, and I remember just wandering around the world feeling completely safe because I could just steal HP and SP and completely sustain myself while I explored the world in those early game hours. It's amazing. The Thief class does come with a fire attack spell. It's not very good, but just like Haunted, just having that little extra built-in elemental coverage can sometimes be what you need for a shield break. It's nifty to have in the pocket. His divine skill, while not better than basically any of the supporting divine skills that I've talked about, I would say is arguably the hardest hitting attack divine skill before the War Master one, and it scales on his speed. This is one ability that you're able to get very high damage with early in the game. In my opinion, it falls off, but early on, it's very good. Therion is one of the fastest characters in the game, always nice when you're trying to get ahead of your enemies, and the Thief has some very good built-in debuffs on the class that make the Thief, in my opinion, a pretty evergreen base class, unlike the Warrior or the Scholar, like we talked about before. These offensive debuffs, Shackle Foe and Corrode Armor, really can neuter bosses to make them more vulnerable to physical attacks or make them do less physical damage to your people. This is good stuff, and it's always nice to have through all phases of the game. In addition to all of that, this isn't a power thing, but it's something I feel like I should mention. Therion's the best starter because, questionably, I think it's a bad mechanic, but I didn't make the game. This game has locked chests throughout the world, and Therion's the only character in the entire game that can open them. So I recommend him as your starter for that reason too. That's not a power thing, but I think many people observe that they don't want to have to backtrack through dungeons, and some of these chests have very good loot. So in a way, Therion, you kind of want to make a fixed party member anyway. You might as well just make him the fixed party member. Not a power thing, but I just felt like I should mention it. And on top of all of that, he also comes online as, in my opinion, the best sorcerer in the entire game because he's very fast and he has a decent base magic, but because of the Thief equipment options with swords and daggers, he is able to equip 2 fire attack boosting weapons in the game, becoming a character who can double boost fire-based spells as a sorcerer and just do devastating fire-based elemental damage as a very speedy sorcerer. So even with this very strong early game, he is also just a massive spell-casting powerhouse in the late game. And while I think you can argue at the very end of the game, Alfyn and Tressa outpace him, I actually probably would for their broad utility. Because I said I'm factoring the entire playthrough at least somewhat, and because he's still outstanding in the endgame, in my opinion, overall, Therion is the strongest character in Octopath Traveler. Alright guys, well that's my tier list. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. I love the Octopath series. I look forward to making a couple of videos about it, celebrating it, as I, hopefully like you, get more and more excited for Octopath Zero's release. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Nick BRPG. Here I talk about all things RPG, with turn-based JRPGs being my absolute favorite. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.